Now, this is a satellite image of the area, and you can see two villages. This one is called Cantia, up here, a large village, and down is a tiny little village called Teledaba, and here, this semicircle here is the remains of what we call a tell, or a mound, a ruin mound of an ancient city. But it's the last remnants of it, because this region has been heavily cultivated and where most of the city has been dug away for farming. So most of the city is invisible, but if I show you what it used to look like in the ancient times, it'll give you a much better impression. Now what's happened is the archaeologists here dug 800 drill cores into the ground in this whole region. And they worked out where the river was and where the towns were and where the marshlands were and where the fields were. And we get this. The ancient Pelusiac branch of the river flowed through this region and it's now completely disappeared. And around it were these things we call turtlebacks, which are sandy mounds, little islands. Now it's on these islands, these turtlebacks, that the city was formed. This is very complicated, but the city of Ramesses, up here, this pink area, that's all the 19th dynasty city of Ramesses II, and this is the southern district of Ramesses, but earlier we have the city of Avaris down here. So the southern quarter of Ramesses was built on top of the older city of Avaris. The city itself has disappeared. It took us 200 years to work out where Ramesses was because we found little bits of statues lying in the ground like this. All the temples and the blocks and the statues were moved to another location by the Egyptians, leaving just these little fragments. Further south, where the Austrian mission are digging today, and have been, as I say, since the 60s, we get a very different terrain. They only have to dig down less than a metre, and they come across the remains. All the rest of it has been dug away by the farmers and turned into fields. So we just have the foundations of the city lying just beneath the surface. The excavation team is led by Manfred Bietak, who is a very famous Austrian archaeologist, and he's the one that found no evidence for the Israelites in Goshen. So if we look at a cleaned up map here, this is Avaris in blue here, these areas here, with the river flowing, splitting in two at this point. Ramesses does not exist at this time. And we're going to look at three things. First of all, the 12th dynasty palace and temple. That's the heart of the city, if you like, where the royal family used to live in the summer. And then there's a palace of a vizier over here. We're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. And then there's the main settlement of what we call the Semites or the Asiatics, the people from Canaan. This area here was completely filled with dwellings and graves of these foreigners living in Egypt. This reconstruction shows you what part of the city looked like. Here you see the palace of the king and the temple on the edge of the river here, on the east side of the Pelusiac branch of the river. And here's the Egyptian quarter and then the Semitic quarter up here. This has been reconstructed from what we know of the site today. And in fact, it extended further across the river as well, so it is one of the biggest cities in the ancient world. Something like 30,000 people lived in this city. And for the ancient world, that's enormous. Here's our little temple and palace, summer palace of the king, the residence where he would come in the summer months to go hunting and fishing. And it's in this spot right here. If you want to believe the story, it's where Moses floated with his little basket and settled in the reeds for the princess, the Egyptian princess, to pick him out of the water and take him into the royal palace. This is how it looked. This is how it was. Today, of course, it's a complete and utter mess. This is actually what's left of the excavations of the main settlement, the Asiatic settlement, that the Austrians have dug in the 1960s. This is how it's overgrown now. And this is at the place called Teledaba, the mound of the hyena in Arabic. And if I show you what it looked like during excavations, you'll see the work that's gone on here in this part of the site. Digging right down to the lowest levels, finding out when the city was founded, what happened to the city throughout its history before its abandonment at the top level here, where the village is today. So, it's the Middle Bronze Age city of Avaris. This is the only real candidate for the era and location of the Israelite sojourn as handed down in the biblical tradition. we're going to now look at what this site can reveal to us about the Israelites. This is a picture of 2 Israelite graves. The one on the right has not been fully excavated yet, and the one on the left there has been dug down to where the body was. The bodies are laid on their sides, usually facing towards the east, in a semi-flex position, semi-fetal position, knees tucked up into their chest. This again is not an Egyptian practice. Egyptians, as you know, I'm sure you know, are laid out in their coffins like this, or if you're a king, like that. Ordinary folk were not buried on their sides in Egypt, not Egyptians. The people who buried on their sides were always people from Canaan, from the north. And in the tomb you find pottery usually, and that pottery tells us where that culture came from, what type of culture it was. And what we know from the artifacts is that these things, which are called duck-bill axes, or axe heads, because they look like the bill of a duck, they are Middle Bronze 2A Canaanite weapons. They come from Canaan. And the storage jars are also Canaanite. They're not Egyptian either. And these little ungent jars here, they're only small like this, piriform in shape. They are typical Canaanite vessels as well. They're not Egyptian. So everything about this culture that we get out of the graves tells us that these people are not Egyptian, they're foreigners from the north. Look at this very waterlogged grave, small grave. Lots of pottery that we know is typically from Canaan. And then this strange thing here, which I shall just clean up for you and show you what it really looks like. Here's a beautiful bronze belt worn by a chieftain figure. So I want you to imagine an Asiatic or a Semite in his long gown with his magnificent bronze belt around here, sporting a very fine set of daggers. These are typical Middle Bronze Age daggers from Canaan, with a ribbing that you see on the blade, ivory handles, gold rivets, and bronze as well. So beautiful weapons. A rich people, not an impoverished people, a wealthy, tribal people from Canaan. So we come now to Jericho, the ruins of Jericho as they are today, excavated principally by Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s, but other scholars before that. And she dug these trenches through the tell, or through the mound, which are like a layer cake, so I can go down there and I can investigate the walls at the side and see what was happening, passing through time. That's one of her excavation photographs. This is me clambering up a ladder to try and look at some pottery coming out of the side of the cutting, to try and date the level. And here we see something very interesting. Here is the foundation of the city wall. The mud brick wall would have been up here, and here we have a sloping plastered surface called a glacis, which is the outer defensive system, which runs down to a revetment wall at the bottom, which holds the whole mound up. What I'll do now is I'll just show you that graphically. Here's the city wall on top, here's the plastered glacis, and here's the revetment wall at the bottom, made of stone. And then the Israelites would have attacked this, but they would have real difficulty in getting up that slippery, plastered slope, while people were throwing slingshots at them and firing at them from above. Very difficult. But of course they didn't need to attack the city because the wall fell down. And that's exactly what happened with this city. That wall at the top was found by Kathleen Kenyon at the bottom. All the bricks from that wall were at the bottom here. The wall fell down and rolled down the slope, ended up at the bottom, so the Israelites, each one, could enter up into the city, one behind the other. So the Jericho that we see there matches the biblical story perfectly. If we go to the northern part of Israel, to Hatzor, the foremost of the kingdoms, as it says in the Bible, we see a similar remarkable story. This is the royal quarter of Hatzor. This is the palace area up here with the gateway. And this is what Joshua 11:10-11 says. Joshua then turned back and captured Hatzor, putting its king Jabin to the sword. Hatzor in olden days was the foremost of those kingdoms. In compliance with the curse of destruction, they put every living creature to the sword, not a living soul was left, and Hatzor was burnt to the ground. Now what's remarkable about this is that when the archaeologists started to dig below the Iron Age gate and the late Bronze Age palace, down in this rather deep area here, they came across the Middle Bronze Age palace, the one of the time of Jericho was destroyed. And they found a tablet down there. And this is the tablet fragment they found. And it's a letter addressed to the king of Hatzor, who lived in that palace. You know what his name was? His name was Yabni, which is the biblical name Jabin. So we actually have a text from the Middle Bronze Age palace mentioning the king who Joshua stuck his sword into when he conquered the city. In the Middle Bronze Age. Eventually, when the whole land was conquered, the Israelites gathered together at the city of Shechem, modern Nablus. And there, the whole congregation heard a speech from Joshua where he erected a standing stone and he told them to swear loyalty to Yahweh and then to go off to their different homes scattered all around the territory they conquered. Well, this is the city of Shechem in the Middle Bronze Age, and here you can see the foundations of the great temple of Baal Berith, Lord of the Covenant, and standing in front of it, watch that, it's a standing stone in front of the temple. Let me reconstruct it for you. This is the temple of Baal Berith, Lord of the Covenant, and here is the standing stone of Joshua erected in front of that temple in the Middle Bronze Age. Now this temple was destroyed by fire, according to the archaeology. Soon afterwards, the whole of the Middle Bronze Age city was destroyed, but the temple was burnt to the ground. And then we match that with a biblical story. In Judges 9:45-49, all that day King Abimelech attacked the town. He stormed it and slaughtered the people inside, razed the town and sowed it with salt. On hearing this, all the leading men inside Migdol Shechem took refuge in the crypt of the temple of Baal Berith. Abimelech's men piled branches over the crypt and set it on fire over those who were inside, so that all the people in Migdol Shechem died too. About 1,000 men and women died inside that temple. And we find archaeology matches exactly with that story. The temple was burnt to the ground and never rebuilt. So that covenant stone, discovered by Ernst Zellin, the archaeologist who excavated the site, I believe is the covenant stone of Joshua, the one that he erected at the site. And then these words appear in Joshua 24:25-28. That day Joshua erected a covenant for the people. He laid down a statute and ordinance for them at Shechem. Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of Yahweh. He then took up a large stone and set it up there under the oak tree in Yahweh's sanctuary. Joshua then dismissed the people, everyone to his own heritage. So we have, to this day, standing in the middle of the town of Nablus in Palestine, the covenant stone of Joshua, completely unrecognized for what it is by both the Israeli government and all the Jews and all the Christians. They don't know what that is. They ignore it. Why? Because it's far too early to be Joshua's covenant stone. It's in the wrong era, as far as they're concerned. And now it's covered in Intifada graffiti. The kids have daubed it with paint. It's standing there forlorn. This is one of the most important artifacts from the Old Testament, standing there unidentified to this day.